Christians in America are woefully unequipped to deal with the battle for the culture. Never mind that progressive ideologues have wider control of institutions and resources, they also understand much of the art forms they're utilizing. For Christians, and by relation, conservatives, and the political right, art is just another utilitarian tool and is wielded accordingly, but with next to no understanding of what makes effective art, and so their approach is to bludgeon. When it comes to American sensibilities, art's primacy hasn't been fostered in a very long time. Too many Christians operating in a mainstream artistic capacity are culturally illiterate. They have only a basic knowledge of popular culture and not much beyond that. This hamstrings whatever aspirations of change that they may want to accomplish. For instance, the animation channel Freedom Toons on YouTube has, as its only merit, its humor, but other than that, its visuals are less than appealing, and the drudging necessity for content ensures a thrifty standard of animation, to put it charitably. Seamus Coughlin himself, a very intelligent and well-spoken man, will talk of the need for excellence and the integrity of worldview that is needed to make good entertainment.
We live in a culture where everyone feels entitled to be good at things. People feel entitled to be told that they're good at something, even if they've never practiced it, or even if they have practiced it, but only to the point where they're mediocre. And then once someone actually does get good at something, they think they're the greatest ever.
But the output of his channel is another unfortunate pupil of the Family Guy school of cartooning, with worse animation because of said time constraints. I single out Freedom Toons because it's the most successful example now of art made by a Christian conservative, and it illustrates certain points that I've felt strongly about regarding this whole mess. The shoddiness is a result of the need to quickly put these out while the iron of topicality is still hot, as if people couldn't discern the same absurdity in the parodied scenarios themselves.
There is something I think is very noble and interesting about the fact that this kid he really wants to be the best drummer. He wants to be the best drummer, and that is the thing he wants to become the best at. And in the grand scheme of things, that might not seem like such a massive or important goal, but the pursuit of excellence is always an important goal.
This is not excelling. This is just constructing another pillar for the already shortened status quo. The problem many Christian artists fall into is playing under progressive standards of aesthetics rather than understanding and applying methods that might make their work timeless and glorifying to God. There's an unthinking acceptance of any technological innovation as an immediate improvement on what came before. Several Christian commentators who have dipped their toe into the AI discussion seem to throw up their hands and go, well, that's it, I guess. But AI art often relies on inputs from people with limited visual reference, and therefore appears homogeneous. Any artist worth his salt will know that it's the intent behind how a piece of work is made that makes it unique, and gives it a life particular to that artist. But many Christians don't know how to confront this. It doesn't seem to register that something that takes away from the manual act of making a work of art isn't the good its convenience might suggest to them. Too often, excellence is trumped by the American ideal of expediency, which in this case breeds mediocrity. Some years ago on Twitter, the music critic Anthony Fantano went on an embarrassing tirade against the right, saying conservatives are not fun, creative, smart, empathetic, or interesting, and don't make great art. He is essentially wrong, but probably got that impression from what is currently being produced. There could have been a well-informed response to this, and the tweet did garner a lot of attention from conservatives like Lauren Southern, providing examples of right-wing or Christian artists. However, Fantano said that art needed to be revolutionary and boundary-pushing, while those on the defensive scrambled to find examples that fit in the criteria he had just set, a criteria which has been ingrained in our minds far too long. Virtually everyone I saw responding to this missed the point entirely. It could have been a moment to instruct on what makes good art and establish a Christian conservative standard, but they didn't. Instead, they bowed to the standards of progress. Progress and boundary pushing are not the pursuit of art. It is a side effect, reached through necessity. Anything else is hubristic and self-indulgent. Communicating truth, the good, and the beautiful is what the most valuable art does. This is what should have been put forth, but it wasn't. Yet we can't just abide by those principles in art making. We also need to consider how the very forms and styles we utilize can express things we don't intend. For instance, certain styles of music within a genre or types of filmmaking derive from a decadent or materialistic worldview, yet they are used by conservatives because that's what they've grown up with and what is most often seen around them. This approach ultimately communicates a mixed message, and it essentially boils down to using poor, unelevating grammar. A movie where the handheld visuals tell us that the only important thing is the material world, and that there is nothing transcendent, is not a movie that will reach the souls of the audience with any permanence. For example, even if someone is applying a godly worldview effectively in a story, it can often be undermined by music that is in contrast to that worldview. Are we just going to let the greatest musical traditions of all time fall away because some people have attachments to hip-hop and mediocre garage rock? Now, there are stories where some of the latter forms are necessary because of the context. However, in a story set in the past, or one that deals with grand situations and perhaps even spiritual ones, there is no contest between contemporary tech-infused rhythms and something like any one of Brahms, Beethoven, or Mahler's symphonies. The latter will clearly be more uplifting for the soul. Traditional symphonic music has never been bested and will most often communicate transcendence, verticality, whereas pop, synth, and hip-hop, if not used in their proper places, can keep things stuck in the horizontal. It is possible to combine both well, yet that is beyond the scope of the present topic. I don't really blame many of these people for their lack of cultural literacy. Our society itself has been fostering ignorance for a long time. And so those who feel a drive to employ their gifts to put lasting goodness into the world have been ill-furnished to do so. Many of us have accepted the view that newer equals better, so Christians who have been trying to fight against one form of materialism in the culture have fallen into another. This becomes obvious when people talk about movies becoming ideologically compromised towards wokeness, eschewing natural storytelling in favor of a message. There's a reason much of the audience rejects the co-opting of familiar stories in this manner. But even when the resources are there, like with the Daily Wire, and films get made, it's the same thing but from another side, and it's just as stilted. Endless hours have been spent lamenting the lack of quality movies like the good old days, but for many Gen Xers and millennials, the good old days appear to be only 30 to 40 odd years ago, as if film history began in 1977 with Star Wars. Christians, and people in general, want movies that feel true, or express values that are closer to what they believe. There are hundreds and hundreds of such films, and the further back in time you go, the greater number of them you can find, especially pre-1970s. The problem is, people being raised in a culture that treasures novelty and trashes anything out of date with contemporary fashions are going to feel self-conscious and even embarrassed to be looking into older art, and in this case, films. so down the memory hole it goes. The wealth of film history has an incredible number of movies that edify and inspire, as well as entertain, the way they have done for decades. The problem is not the movies, the problem is the prejudice against the old. Instead, the Christian and conservative pundits are scraping the bottom of the barrel, the table scraps of what the progressive-dominated culture tosses our way. The discourse about contemporary movies resorts to a lot of similar phrases. Ah, this movie has a scene where a character did something kind of based. Or even more pathetic, this movie is implicitly right-wing. The current culture is irredeemable and must be rejected on that. We will not make better art by trying to save something unrepentant and patently antagonistic towards our worldview and beliefs, let alone by imitating it. Anything else is merely coping that avoids or is ignorant of the immense cultural legacy that can aid that cause, but is all but buried. Enough of trying to find a modicum of redemption in unredeemable movies and shows. Going back to study older films, books, paintings, and music can only be beneficial. Some may think that if the output of mainstream media is so abysmal, then how is retreating from that arena going to bring in good works of art? To that I say, you don't need a glut of media, even one catered to your beliefs. There are better uses of our time, and a drought of movies and TV shows will do us good. In the meantime, read, write, and make things of value. Sheer willpower will not win a fight where training is needed. Now, as I've said, a lot of Christians know the power of art and want to use it. And the same is true for conservatives. Both their purposes frequently overlap. Unfortunately, it's often a case of the blind leading the blind when so many of them have such a narrow field of influence, are not well read, or don't even think twice about the methods of communicating through one medium or another and how that affects the message they are trying to put through. It's the latter that can come from even those who are well read. Obviously, movies shouldn't beat the audience over the head. But many of these people who are trying to alter the culture give their thoughts on what kinds of movies should be made, and these often hinge on sticking it to the left through turning the tables of what the left is doing to them. Could you imagine if things were reversed? I hardly see people in these circles talking about a story they're genuinely excited to tell, simply because the story excites them, not how much it's gonna own the libs. I hardly think that a majority of them are really serious about making art. I'm not even talking about taking back the culture here. Do they even know what is necessary to make something edifying to people, and to understand how you are going to bring that about effectively and beautifully? Or is this next project just the cultural equivalent of a ball-peen hammer? A mainstream effort to create an alternative to Hollywood is seen in the Daily Wire. Films like Run, Hide, Fight, about a girl stopping a school shooter, and Terror on the Prairie, about a mother defending her son on a homestead, are not good films. Competent in some respects, and certainly so at aping the ubiquitous docu-grit cinematography style and the inane music of Hollywood. So, well done in that regard. It's funny that they want to make films that don't fall into the Christian movie category of cringe, but then Run, Hide, Fight has a cancer mom trope that's ripped right from a bad Hallmark movie or God's Not Dead. And Terror on the Prairie's casting of Gina Carano for the lead seemed mainly out of spite for her cancellation, and not in consideration of her being right for the part, which she wasn't. I also find it curious that, though they're trying to make conservative movies with traditional values, these two films are about masculinized women. But guns, I guess, so it's conservative. Table scraps. Probably the most ridiculous example is Daily Wire's plans for their streaming service, which were shown at a telling trade show-style presentation by Jeremy Boring. The need to present what you have upcoming to your audience is essential, but in a way, this stuff feels as if it's not really something of value that's going to be worth your time. It's video filler that is being used in a very imprecise utilitarian way. And this mediocre kids show, I don't even care that it's copying another popular, slightly less inane show. It just makes me think, what kid would want to watch this? Is it for really little kids?
Rob Schneider.
I know when I was younger, I loved adventure shows and not anodyne stuff that holds little appeal at all. Why not make something cool like Johnny Quest? It seems so thoughtless, and it feels really just about content.
$100 million of initial investment into kids' content in what we believe will be a 100-year enterprise to create content that kids love and parents can actually trust.
I'm reminded of the dozens of conservative kids' books dealing with the transgender issue or some other topic in one fashion or another. And I wonder if these books are even for the kids or the parents, the same way that lugubrious anti-racist baby kids book is really just for woke parents. Like I said, what kid wants to read this stuff? And the artwork is almost always clip art adjacent level. There are many, many examples of great kids' books with beautiful illustrations that actually give kids something to latch onto and instill a sense of wonder in them. And often the best kids' books are simple in plot, but have a kind of adventurous aspect to them. These conservative kids' books that get put out by everyone and their grandma look more like pamphlets and are just about as appealing. Matt Walsh's book, Johnny the Walrus, is one of the ugliest looking attempts I've yet seen. Even the title seems cynically generic. If these messages are that important, then I understand giving the parents an aid to communicate them to their kids, but there's more to raising kids than just polemic literature. Their imaginations are gonna get stunted otherwise. These artists aren't even trying to compete with, let alone rise above, what's out there in terms of aesthetics. And that goes for just about everything else in the whole Christian conservative cultural sphere. It isn't very traditional to continue the ugly mediocrity that is contemporary animation, which is more about finding clever time-saving shortcuts rather than beautifully rendered and labored over characters. It would be a coup to pursue the standards of Disney in the 40s, heck, even the 60s, just to attempt it. The last vestiges of real, classical animation died with the likes of Richard Williams. Now, it's expediency that matters, not craft. If something is made easier, it is not necessarily done better. The Daily Wire, and people like Seamus Coughlin, are only keeping things on the level with the low bar that is a result of an abandonment of traditional values. It's the worldview that produced things like Rick and Morty, a reprehensibly ugly show both in aesthetics and thinking, the epitome of a worldview without metaphysics. It doesn't help that livelihoods now depend on the constant outpouring of content, which often prevents people from getting to make things of outstanding quality. If one were in a better position, it would be commendable to put quality over quantity. To pick on Freedom Tunes one more time, I can't see watching any of them more than once, getting a chuckle out of it, feeling validated in my position, and moving on. The legacy of comedic animation should go back further than The Simpsons. Any one Looney Tunes short by Bob Clampett can put the entire Freedom Tunes output to shame. Why aren't we making things meant to be enjoyed many times over, like The Great Piggy Bank Robbery, one of the greatest American films ever made? It was a cartoon just made to be shown in theaters before a feature film. Are we supposed to universally accept that that level of craft and quality in both humor and art is unattainable again? Or have too many people forgotten how to even get there? Right now, the bar is set at vectorized bathroom doodles. You get a better impression from just listening to the audio, and what's in your imagination is likely more appealing than what's on screen. Stop this hysterical mindset of worrying that if you don't plug your message into a film in a way that makes it obvious, you're somehow not fighting the culture war. Just producing something of true artistic excellence that upholds goodness and speaks truthfully about the world is more than enough to combat the art of today. and most of the latter is morally bankrupt anyway, so if it weren't for the addiction to a certain kind of style, which, no fault of our own, has surrounded us since childhood, we would perhaps be more open to older works of media, and less so to the sewer sluice of content that are the streaming services. One person who I'd point to as having really understood the nature of the problem and done well in producing good art is the icon carver and host of The Symbolic World, Jonathan Pageau. I don't hear him going on about how he's going to stick this message into his art or story. He's already figured out the proper place of things and is secure and confident enough in his craft to know that his faith will shine through. This has been demonstrated in works that he's written, like the graphic novel God's Dog or the retellings of fairy tales. It's a great step in the right direction. What I aimed for with this essay was to set the stage for the dilemma we face. Many are aware of these problems and have commented on them, and there is far too much to comment on here, but I felt there was enough that went unaddressed that necessitated my writing this. I don't have the money or connections the people I've mentioned have, and so I can only hope that they or others like them will consider these points I've made and understand the different approach that is sorely needed. Christians must realize that by playing by the rules of the monogenic and daisy-cutting culture of aesthetic equity, we are doing a disservice to the values that we hold, and the God we are supposed to honor through our work.